Alright, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Dyson Sphere Program. So, similar to last week's design, we're going to go ahead and do a time lapse of sorts. Last episode, we pretty much went over the foundations of the foundations of a new factory that we're kind of starting, because I'm trying to scale everything up and to get towards just an overall better production level for really everything we have. So in that process, we are slowly taking apart the old factory and scaling up other parts. So in doing so, in this episode, we're pretty much focused on scaling up a few more of the remaining components on Beta Arundi 2, such as, I believe, the silicon, glass, and the graphene, and a couple others we hadn't fully connected up. And so it's really just going through and getting everything put together so that way we can really go full bore, because there's still some of those core components that we need that we just don't have yet. And also in this episode, I'm definitely focused on trying to get more of really everything connected up together. So you're going to start seeing really interstellar logistics lanes start to be established. And so that pretty much involves getting the warp matrix or the warp cores transported everywhere, along with getting our trying to think what they were, deuterium fuel rods transported as well to pretty much where we need them. And so now that we have those two components effectively set up so that way we can go between star systems, it does make it a lot easier for us to be able to transport things. So here I'm just going up and setting pretty much a coal outpost. And as you notice, we don't really have enough power to run all the miners, but I'm just wanting to get everything established. I do pretty much have the ultimate goal in this episode, also trying to get the tier 2 miner, which becomes a much more efficient in terms of speed per second. I'm not sure if it is better than the tier 1. Let me know. Is the tier 2 more effective in terms of like one of it being better than just a bunch of the tier 1s, right? Can we get more potential mining out of it, or kind of what other benefits do we get out of the tier 2? Or is it that the tier 2 offers us more mining per second, but not more mining multiplicative because we have more miners? I don't know. I'll have to take a look at it, but if somebody could kind of explain those two, that'd be greatly appreciated, because from my understanding, the tier 2 just seems like a better upgrade. But if it's one of those weird things where it's like, well, really the tier 1's more efficient if you just use a bunch of them, so I don't know. I'll kind of take a look at them. Anyway, so there's going to be a lot of going back and forth between the planets in this, and a lot of that just comes down to us having to now go between star systems. And so definitely investing in more of the kind of long range speed upgrades is going to be important, because those are components that we're going to need, right? Is to be able to go fast between star systems and planets. We're also going to have to consider some of the other facts as well as transporting material, right? Because we need to make sure that we can get coal between the different star systems, but also make sure that we are adequately having enough in transport, right? So that we're not waiting on it to be transported, even though we're transporting a lot of it. I'm also making sure we're queuing up things, because just like in the last episode, we want to make sure that our inventory is being utilized, right? It is a crafting table, and we want to make sure that we're using it, because if we're not using it, well, then we're wasting it. And when we're in need of a lot of these basic components, we do want to make sure we're getting it. And kind of on the right, you can more or less see our Dyson Sphere, or again, Dyson Ring. We're limited by the fact that the solar sails, I believe I've turned off for now, just so that way we can kind of focus on getting just the resources put together to basically scale up the factory to really get things going, and really that goal of getting the Dyson Sphere and, you know, completing the game. And so here I'm really just making sure that everything can get connected that needs to be connected. Now there are certain things that we don't have being mined, and so I believe one of those was the titanium, and then just making sure that that's connected on Beta Rindy 1. And then also, I don't know how much titanium we had on Beta Rindy 1, but it's important that everything in the supply chains are connected up. And there are some points in here where really I'm just waiting for either my energy to replenish or just getting the belts put together. But there was a lot in today's kind of session of getting things put together and crafted up so that way we could get to where we needed to go, right? In a sense. And I was also checking my calculator for how much of a certain thing I would need, both per second, per minute, and then also the amount of machines that we're going to need. And it's really just making sure that everything's set up properly so that way I don't have accidentally make an oops, we didn't produce enough of this and now I have to kind of tear up a bunch of sections of a factory, right? And so really I was using a lot of this time where I was waiting for things to craft or just some other components to happen, just to kind of check my notes and to really look at, okay, well, this needs to get done here, here, and here, and really making sure that we can queue up everything we need to get queued up was pretty important. And then trying to think what were some of the other components we were looking at. I know one of the things I was looking at too at this point was making sure that everything that we needed to have connected was connected for us to kind of go into that phase 2, because a lot of what we've been working on was already finished. And so here I was just making sure that, okay, we need more titanium, so let me get this titanium mined, because I hadn't realized we didn't actually ended up connecting any of this. So we had some domestically on Beta Rindy 2, but we didn't actually have enough production there. So I definitely wanted to make sure that we had enough ore production, and so here I am on Beta Rindy 1 making sure that we did. And then we do have to make some local logistics bots just so that way we can get some things transported, because just like with the, I believe it's the steel and then the titanium alloy, those are going to require things that are produced on Beta Rindy 2 along with some additive components, but it's making sure that we can transport those. I didn't end up getting to make, well, rather, I didn't queue those up, so I will have to do that between episodes. If you guys haven't already, make sure you guys smash today's like button, and if you haven't considered it, maybe consider subscribing, as it really does help out the channel, as it does show you guys the support, and it helps the algorithm, and all those fun things. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns for me about anything you've seen today, or anything about the series, definitely let me know, and I will try to answer it as best as I can. Or if you just have any fun tips, helpful tips, those are always appreciated in this. And then if it's like the most efficient build for something, I probably won't immediately use it, but I will at least glance at it to perhaps take inspiration from. Because I do try to discover builds on my own, at least the first couple go-arounds, because my background for games like this are Factorio and like Satisfactory, and so it's always trying to come up with new ways of doing something, just to see, okay, yes, this other thing might be the most efficient way to do it, right? But is there potentially something that was overlooked that could be better at scale, right? And sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. More often than not, there isn't, because usually the older a game is, especially between updates, especially if it's a mechanic that hasn't changed or a recipe that hasn't changed in quite some time, then traditionally there just isn't any way to improve upon it. But sometimes there is, and the community might overlook that. But speaking of Satisfactory, that might be a game worth looking into to replace Dyson Sphere Program once we finish this, because I surmise we have probably at least another 2 weeks before I finish, because we didn't get to the chemical section of the factory today, and I also didn't quite get over to some of the other components. So there's definitely some parts of the factory that I have yet to actively tear up. Some parts of the factory I also didn't really need to tear up either. And so here I'm just kind of going around and gathering the components we're going to end up needing to make sure that we can make enough of the blue belt, because that's pretty much the standard I've been building in at this point. mainly because I figure, you know what, we have the resources, let's just go ahead and use it. As for kind of what we're going to be working on next is a lot of this kind of the first half of today's episode is me just going around and working on connecting things up and making sure that we have the infrastructure in place to be able to handle that interstellar logistics grid that expands beyond our current star system, because there are certain resources I'm going to need from other star systems, such as coal, mainly because our system doesn't have a lot of it, but also just looking at, okay, what do I need from some of the other nearby systems. There are quite a few times where I was kind of just doing something and then realized, oh, I actually need to go back over to the other star system, which kind of sucked because it does take a minute to travel there, and there were a few moments where I didn't quite realize that I had dropped out of warp because I had either stepped out of the room while I was warping to the next star system, and then I would come back and then either accidentally press S on my keyboard, and that I didn't realize slows you down from 12 AU a second to like 5 AU a second, and I was like, why is it taking like 5 minutes to get to a place? And you'll actually see that later because I didn't realize it at the time. That's what I was accidentally doing when I was resting my hand back on my keyboard. And then pretty much we had connected up enough coal on the planet to be able to sustain the amount of carbon, or not carbon, graphene that we needed. Because graphene is going to be important in the energetic graphite. That, I want to say we had like 11 columns of that set up on Beta Arendi 2, and part of that is just the sheer amount that we're going to need. And so once we set up a lot of these more advanced components that require those arc furnaces, we can start looking at what we need to do in order to more accurately build upon kind of our previous work, right? Just because then we can start expanding into the more advanced technologies. Because we've started a lot of the foundational stuff in last episode, and so now it's just going on and making sure that we can start to begin to do some of the others. As for the sciences, so the calculator that I've kind of been plugging everything into and looking at more or less has been looking at what we're going to need in order to get all the sciences scaled, and, well, not scale the sciences, but make sure that we can both maintain the sciences that we have and expand the rocket production. A couple of the sciences aren't going to change really a whole lot, one of those being the gravitation, and that's only just due to how it is, right, in its nature. So I don't really have to worry too much about that, which is nice. And then, yeah, there's definitely a couple of segments in here where, again, a lot of these times where I'm just kind of standing around was me looking at my spreadsheet and just checking if I was on track for what I needed to be doing, because we're really not hemmed in for time a lot of the times in these recording sessions, but there are times where I'm trying to hit certain marks just to make sure that I can get it done and whatnot. I'm also going around and cleaning up parts of the factory as I go, because there are, as you saw there, mines that are finishing or have finished, and I'm also just wanting to make sure we start to kind of collect some of the antiquated components of the factory. And so really just going through and making sure that we have everything connected properly and fixing some of our mistakes, because I know in the last little bit there were a couple things that I had either connected or misconnected or just old belt that led nowhere, and we'll actually see a couple of those accidents here in a minute. One of them being I didn't realize what we needed on for the input for the glass. I actually thought it was the silicon, not realizing that it's actually stone you need for that, and which I kind of thought was funny. So I was like, oh, silicon glass, cool, go. In reality, it's actually stone you need for that. And I'm like, oh, okay, things are working, awesome. But I didn't realize that none of the furnaces were turning on, which I guess should have been a big alarm, because as you can see, they're all still yellow, meaning they're lacking an input. And I was like, oh, crap. We're not gonna get this to work properly. But I didn't realize it until, I don't know, 20 minutes. Because, again, this is a timeout, so everything's sped up. So I probably didn't realize it for about 20 minutes. I'm like, why isn't it working? And then I'm like, oh, crap. And then that's when it dawned on me. And then I was looking, and I was like, wait, have we used it yet? And I was like, oh, we did. All right, so let's change it to local supply, local demand. And this is one of those instances where I do need to make the towers and effectively allow it to do its thing. And so this was a slightly separate recording session now. So there were 2 recording sessions in today's episode. So we've kind of crossed over that point now where we're in the next day. I actually recorded this today. Well, for you guys, it's Saturday. For me, it's Friday. I was going to try to upload it Friday, but due to thunderstorms, I just wasn't able to because we lost power a couple times, and I didn't really want to try to get anything done just because it was already kind of late, and with the sporadic storm, I just really didn't want to try to risk it. And then, but I was able to get it recorded, because the first half I got recorded Thursday night. Internet, power, having fun times. So even if I had power, the internet took about 30 minutes to come back, and then pain, waiting. One time I actually had my internet go out for like 3 days. I was kind of angry, very, very angry. And then it came back eventually. It was kind of annoying, but whatever. So here I'm setting up a lot of those reactors we had built, just so that way we could have power. Now I do know on this planet we could have connected up array receivers and started actually utilizing some of that Dyson Sphere energy. But on some of the colony worlds that we have in the other star systems, definitely the reactors were the way to go over the wind turbines. I like the wind turbines. I kind of like that hemispheric look to them, but they do have a bigger toll, I suppose, on the UPS and stuff, along with just a larger footprint in terms of equivalent power. So really, again, I'm going through making sure we can connect some more of these raw resource productions, making sure we can get the energetic graphite we need, because this is going to be a pretty substantial investment, making sure that everything's connected up with the coal, and then just so that we can go kind of that route that we need, and making sure everything gets connected up that needs to be connected up. There was definitely a couple moments where I didn't quite realize that we didn't connect something up, and by that I mean we didn't set the proper designation to either be local demand or local supply, or remote supply, remote demand, which did cause a couple issues, I believe, on one of the mining worlds, and so I had to go back and fix that. But it really didn't take too long to do that. As for kind of the rest of what we have here, is just making sure that we can get out all the components that I can get put together today, so if it just required one input, that was just mined, then that's what I went ahead and did. Now there were a couple occasions, such as I know the steel and then the titanium alloy, that I didn't set up because those needed multi input or multi-resource inputs. Because I know, for instance, the steel requires, or not the steel. Is it the steel? No, titanium alloys, I think what I'm thinking of, requires sulfuric acid, and so I hadn't set that up yet at the time. So I didn't set up the logistics station. However, I guess I could have, but I was mainly focused on getting these components set up so that we could at least start focusing on the intermediate products that would immediately benefit from us producing these. Kind of as for the rest of it, we definitely had some issues getting things established. One of them being we didn't have enough transportation in between the resource world and here. And that could be for two reasons, one of which we're either A, not mining enough, or B, we just don't have enough in transit. And I think really it's kind of that latter, or the former? The former, of we just didn't have enough mining capacity. And so pretty much that's mostly what we did today, is just setting everything up, connecting things around, and really just making sure that the factory can continue growing as we need it to, right? Today's episode definitely focused primarily on kind of that continuation of getting resources put together, scaling those up. And as for the actual like factory kind of refactorization that we started last episode, we kind of saw some of that in some components begin to get torn up, but for the most part we really didn't push too heavily. And so this is kind of at the point where I started realizing, okay, you know what, let's just get rid of all these ores so that we can start really tearing things up. And so I figured, you know what, I know it's a little bit energy inefficient, but we're going to ship off the ore off world, deal with it on Beta Arendi 2, and then we'll ship back the final product, so that way we didn't have these kind of furnace columns still here. And because that was really my goal, was to start to get rid of these, because I figured, you know what, we have logistics stations around, let's use them. So let's try to get rid of any of the ones we could. And so that's kind of what I started looking for, was okay, what ore patches could we get rid of? And another of the things that I wanted to get rid of was that kind of pool of water, and I was just trying to decide how / where to move it. And really I ended up deciding at first, I was like, oh, maybe I could keep it, but then I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna just put it way over here, just so that way I don't have to worry too much about it. And it really doesn't require that much space, and really if we need to, because this is kind of already at the edge of the factory, we could have a little bit of a bigger area for the water collection. And then kind of really as we go about it, we did look at some of the other components we can have, and one of those being just really what we're going to look at, right? And so I started to focus on getting rid of other areas in the factory that we no longer needed. And so that's kind of what we're going to start taking a look at. And it's really emptying up parts of the factory that I can, right? And so that being anywhere we have warehouses that are no longer being used, any obsolete belts that we can get rid of. And funny enough, I actually found a redundancy on one of the iron lines, because I was like, oh, where's this coming from? Iron ore? Go into a thing. And then I kind of realized here's actually the iron line I was talking about. I was like, oh, it's going into here. Cool. Let me just connect it to this. Well, I didn't realize where that iron line was coming from. It was actually coming from the other logistics station. So I hadn't realized that part. And I was like, oh, weird, iron. And so I'm like, okay, let me get rid of all this so that we can fill it up. And then I kind of did the little trick where you can hold the pickup button and basically move that kind of herd of little blocks around. And so here I was like, okay, well, let's see, what else can we take away or plug in? And then, you know, let me just throw that in. And then I realized, okay, let me set the minimum load for the vessels all the way down, so that way they would move the inconsequential amount of resources. And then here's where I realized, oh crap, it's feeding iron. I was like, okay, what's it feeding? And then I realized, oh, it's feeding that other logistics station, right? And so then it just kind of became this loop that I made sure I disconnected. And same goes for the water here. I was like, do I really need this here? Is it something that would prevent us from doing a thing? And then I kind of looked at it and I was like, not really. So let's just get rid of it. So I got rid of it and then filled it in. As for the water, it was a free resource. We're not limited by that, so I just got rid of it. Although that would be an interesting mechanic for them to add, is you would actually run out of water. Same thing with the oil. I know it is a little bit annoying because it would make it much harder to do that process, but I suppose they could just balance it with the same way they have other components or other ore veins, in regards to you just have more slash bigger ore veins of oil. It would be interesting though to see kind of an environmental update to this game where, just like in Factorio, you can kind of physically see your world change a little bit with that pollution. I think it would be interesting to see, like, oh, you're pumping all the water off of your planet. You're stripping away the atmosphere, right? Because you're a robot. You don't really care about those things. You don't really need them. And so it'd be interesting to see as you tiled over the surface and pumped all the water away and were doing things of how that would affect the ecosystem slash the atmosphere and change the planet from like a tropical paradise into like a barren moon. I don't know. Just kind of some food for thought there, but I think it'd be a little bit interesting. So now here's really the first point in the episode where we started actually looking at expanding kind of the new factory. And so here I'm just trying to come up with a design that allows us to tile it, because I think we need something like 75 of these assemblers, and so I'm just trying to come up with a design that would allow us to do that, and or rather how many we would need to make it a modular kind of blueprint stamp, if you will. But pretty much that's, I think, mostly it for today. So if you guys enjoyed today's episode, you guys know what to do. Smash that like button if you enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't already, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button, as that really is appreciated and does help the channel grow. You know, the quicker we get to, I don't know, 500,000 subscribers, definitely the more content we can do and get to the next game and kind of see where it goes, right? If you have any questions, comments, or concerns for me, definitely leave those down below. Or if you have any helpful tips, those are always much appreciated. Or if you guys have suggestions about the next game to play, definitely let me know about that as well. Other than that, I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one. Peace out.